Welcome to The Screen Queen, the show where I'll be talking about your favorite show or your favorite movie. You'll just have to find out what you're about to know. This is your Screen Queen, your host, Samantha Parrish. Hello there and welcome back to the show. This is your host, your pro at talking about the retro, Samantha Parrish. So, there seems to be a theme that all of our successful action movies tend to revolve around Christmas. But in this case, this was a game changer that this was not only the first buddy cop movie during Christmas time, this was the first successful buddy cop movie. Lethal Weapon was a game changer back in 1987. When we look at crime movies nowadays, we tend to just kind of write them off as cliches, and we do that because Lethal Weapon is the one that started it all. The angry captain. The partners are polar opposites that become best friends by the end of the movie. The ragtag team stuff. The saxophone's playing. The one character that's the partner has so much trauma going on. Lethal Weapon practically created the blueprint for the future cop movies. And yet there's something about Lethal Weapon that doesn't come off as a silly, over-the-top action movie. Well, actually, it is a very silly, over-the-top action movie, but there's some scenes in here that make it different and stick out from the other cop movies that we've had. Now, before I begin this episode, it is absolutely vital that I address something. Lethal Weapon has many moments that it tackled back in 1987. And some of those moments are a little bit more uncomfortable to talk about with some people that have gone through something in their mental health. So I have to give a warning to those out there that are uncomfortable with the talk about self-harm and PTSD, that those two will be talked about later on in the episode. But if that's something that you're not comfortable with, please do not push yourself through that moment. I'm going to put a timestamp so that way you can go around that entire part of that episode. I love this space for what it has done for a lot of people, and I have been gaining a lot of attention and praises for how I've created the show to be a safe space. But I also want to take into effect that a lot of people struggle with their mental health, and sometimes they can't hear certain things that would put them right back into a place that they don't want to go back to. I understand the same thing happens to me too, where a word or a event will put me right back in my trauma. So with that mentioned, now here is Lethal Weapon. So let's look at the history of the buddy cop story. The buddy cop movie started in 1982 with the movie 48 Hours. And we saw Nick Nolte and Eddie Murphy as a ragtag, unlikely duo trying to catch killers. And it proved very successful, and a lot of people have cited this as the granddaddy and inventor of the buddy cop genre. We did have some funny crime movies before we had 48 Hours, but this was the one that truly was created to be a buddy cop film. This is a fun time to see two people fight crime in a short amount of time. Pun not intended, that did not mean to be a frickin' rhyme. I just happened to be magic at some points in this episode. It just happens. But then after we had 48 Hours, then we had Beverly Hills Cop. And then we get Lethal Weapon. Now here's how we got Lethal Weapon. We have it solely because of Shane Black. Now Shane Black might be a name that you know, and it might be a name that you don't know, but I am sure you have seen this name pop up or might find it familiar. Shane Black did a lot of screenwriting for many of the films we see today. He did Lethal Weapon, he did the sequels, a little bit more about that in another episode. He wrote The Last Boy Scout. He's done a lot for the crime genre. And back in mid-1980s, he became the hottest name. Shane Black was 25 years old, fresh out of UCLA with a script that he took to Warner Brothers. And at first, Warner Brothers was not on board with it. They were like, maybe not. Until finally one of them looked at the script and decided, hey, let's take a chance on this. This actually is more than what we thought it was. Because of how layered it was and how dark it was, Warner Brothers was paying attention. And they gave him a shot. And they had all their screenwriters working with Shane Black to present Lethal Weapon. As the scriptwriters and the director began working with Shane Black to see the rest of his story, Warner Brothers got a little bit alarmed when they found out more to the story, that it was much darker in his original vision. And that is where another name comes into the picture. This is a name that you won't know, and that's okay, because I didn't know about this man until the production of this episode. There is a uncredited writer and savior named Jeffrey Boehm. Jeffrey Boehm basically came in to rewrite a lot of the script to make it a bit lighter, to ease the audience into Lethal Weapon. And I can definitely understand that. I'm a dark humor writer, and I write some dark stuff that my friends have been like, Sammy, we didn't know you had this in you. So I completely understand why their reaction was a bit alarming. When Shane Black caught wind about the changes and he saw the way that they rearranged a lot of his story, he did not like it. And that's understandable for someone that's like, hey, this is my story. This is my book, baby. Why would you do this? And he kind of had to have a crash course in having to think about an audience's perspective. And after a while, he said, all right, I'm okay with the changes. And they went hand in hand to let him have his certain moments, but they had to have the opening just a little bit more digestible. It's going to be a heavy movie. We shouldn't have to hit the audience with something heavy so quickly. Because originally, the way Lethal Weapon was going to start out was Riggs in a bar fight. In the DVD special features for Lethal Weapon 4, there is a scene shown from the very beginning of what was filmed for Lethal Weapon. That it was going to be Riggs in a bar and 4 people get into a fight with him. And naturally, he's Riggs, so he wins. And the bartender gives him a bottle of booze and tells him, get the hell out of here and don't come back. That does fit Riggs' character, but that would feel out of place, having a scene like that coming on too soon. It feels like it would ruin the chance to really get to know Riggs. We got to ease into these characters with the rewrite that Jeffrey Boehm did. As much as we want to see our characters get into the action, it's nice to know what their lives are like outside of the action. What are they like? What do they do? It's the reason why a lot of people cite Lethal Weapon as a wonderful movie, because you got to know them. With something like Die Hard, you do get to know John McClane and he's got like a rotten life, but to actually see a home life for an action hero is kind of rare. And the different living situations for Murtaugh and Riggs, it's like night and day, which really is going to pave the way for when they actually meet. It's those little niches that build into a film that you got to appreciate. But there's also something of utmost importance that came out of that scene. Was getting to see Mel Gibson's fine ass walking across that screen. Oh my gosh! Whew. God bless your soul, Jeffrey Boehm. Thank you so much. Woo! And now, knowing what I know now, that the opening was going to be completely different, now I have a further appreciation for that scene, so I definitely have to replay it, for honorable purposes. But ironically, that wasn't the only change that happened to Lethal Weapon. With the revision of the opening scene, there were 2 scenes that were left out of the movie. When I first got the DVD, it said director's cut, and so I first thought, okay, well, was it something like they left stuff out of the movie? Like, what changed? Yours truly was not around in 1987, so I'm thinking I won't know for sure what was left in and what was left out. It wasn't until I did my research that the scene with Martin Riggs going to the active shooting at the school that he stopped because, well, he's Martin Riggs, that scene was not present. They took that out. So if you look at the entirety of when we see Martin Riggs, we don't really get to know him in action, which kind of deprives it. So it just jumps from him in the morning, and then him at his trailer, and then we cut to him at the whole Christmas, white Christmas exchange. Let's go with that. The vulnerable moment in his trailer where he's thinking about his wife, and then he meets Murtaugh. Kind of. The other scene that was originally cut from the theatrical release was where Martin Riggs was driving around and he picked up a teenage prostitute and asked her to come home and watch TV with him. It's strange to look at this and know that the two major important scenes that we got to know Martin Riggs was kept out. The school shooting scene showed that Martin Riggs generally does not care. This was our first insight that he is a man that would rather die with his boots on. And he goes in with no protection, and he shoots the bad guy dead, just in and out. No value for his own life at all. Or safety, or protocol. It kind of makes you feel, well, what's his game? What's his angle at? What's going on here? How come he recklessly did that? Does he have a death wish, or something else going on? And then having that small scene where he wants to have the company of the teenage prostitute to just be there with him to watch TV, that's a nice vulnerable side to him where we get to see what's really going on, that he's a lonely dude. He doesn't have anybody. All he has is Sam the dog, who's just doing the best a dog can do. It's kind of strange to note these very important scenes were kept out. I can't vouch for this because I wasn't around in 1987. But I wonder how the audience was able to take this back then, that they were able to only see a little bit about Martin Riggs. They didn't get to see these very important details about him that makes more sense in the more poignant scenes. If it wasn't for those two scenes, we wouldn't get to have more of Martin Riggs. But at the same time, I want to say this. Even if those scenes were still withdrawn from the final cut of the movie, we still would be able to get to know Martin Riggs. Sometimes it's a double-edged sword about how much story you want to give to a character so your audience can be able to put the pieces together themselves. But with a character like Martin Riggs, who's so enigmatic and mysterious, you want to know, well, what's going on here? Something's happening. With the scene with him in action, he doesn't act all cocky. Normally, that would be cocky in other various crime movies, that someone just would rather throw themselves into danger because they don't care. But without the layering, we wouldn't be able to know why they do dangerous things, because you're not supposed to do dangerous stuff. It makes sense for his character to go in there because he doesn't care anymore. He stopped caring the moment his wife died. And he's just throwing caution to the wind. He's a character done right when it comes to lone wolf characters, and that's why his character stands out the most among all of the action movie heroes, including John McClane. That's top tier. That's very much top tier. The character of Martin Riggs has made such an impact on the action genre that we wouldn't really have our other movie characters without him. But the reason why isn't actually because of the action scenes, it's the vulnerable scenes. And this is where I'm going to be talking about one of the most important scenes of the movie, which is his attempted suicide scene. Now, before I dive into talking about that scene, I want to go ahead and just say my warning again from the beginning of the episode that this is really going to be a heavy commentary about suicide. And I don't want people to listen to something that will make them uncomfortable because, like I said, this is a safe place. So go to the description box, there's a time code, and you'll know where you can begin the rest of the episode. Your mental health matters. It matters to me. I might not know you, but I've been there. I'm still there. And I don't want anyone to feel uncomfortable. Okay? Alrighty. So, here's the scene. Looking at this scene, despite how small it is, it feels like it's going on for a very long time, mostly due to the atmosphere and the way that Mel Gibson brings so much tragedy into that layer we see about Martin Riggs, that it finally has boiled to a point that Now everything makes sense as to why he recklessly goes into situations, why he doesn't talk to a lot of people, that he is suffering on the inside, and a part of us wanted to know if something was going on, and then we got our question answered with this scene that he is at rock bottom and does not want to go on, that he would rather end his life right there because of his suffering. And it's such a level of suffering that it's so hard to talk about, that it gets to that point. I've lost friends to that and never knew what they were going through at all. It's one of those scenes that you look at and you know that there's a person out there that's just like Martin Riggs, just suffering, and we don't know how long, what's going on, what was the cause of it. We know from the movie that he lost his wife, but we don't know the circumstances quite yet. But we know that it hit him hard. We don't really see any memories, and because it's an unseen grief, it hits it even more. All we have to go on is the stories that someone tells us about how much they loved someone. All we see with Martin Riggs is a picture and how much he looks at it with tears in his eyes. But the scene also does have a silent commentary about the people that suffer during the holidays. Lethal Weapon is all the way a Christmas movie. I mean, it even has a Looney Tunes Christmas Carol playing in the background during this extremely intense and tragic moment. There are a lot of people that suffer so much during the holidays that not everyone can just come together and forget about grief. Grief is, it's very different for a lot of people. And to see a character like Martin Riggs, as painful as it is to see his suffering, someone else like that is like that out there during the holidays, that they are struggling to get through it because Christmas is not the same for them. You don't see a lot of scenes like this in other Christmas movies. There are Christmas movies that do talk about grief, but never get into the extent where you see what someone is truly going through on their own. If you had a scene like this play in something that wasn't like Lethal Weapon, it probably wouldn't have worked. But having this in the film, it does finally get people aware about what people are like during the holidays, especially if they have depression, anxiety, and PTSD, that it's just going to be like another level of weight on their shoulders. The scene is very emotionally draining to watch Mel Gibson go through these like roller coaster of emotions with what his character is going through. And to add more to the scene, there was a legit bullet in the chamber. They put a blank bullet in there, and because Hollywood didn't really think about safety regulations back then, they thought that if Mel Gibson pulled the trigger, then the blank wouldn't hurt him. When it's actually been proven that a blank will hurt you, even though it doesn't really have like an impact, but the air with that blank will do something. So think about that when you watch that scene, that we could have barely been watching the end of Mel Gibson right there. We had a lot of characters in the 1980s that were becoming the unspoken spokesman of mental health. We had John Rambo from the Rambo series saying, "You just don't turn it off." And then we had The Breakfast Club, where all of the characters were discussing their mental health and what was going on in their psyche. And then we have Lethal Weapon, that had its own definition with not a lot of words, but just showing what the mental taxation looks like. Even though it's a scene that does show what's really going on with the mental health with Martin Riggs, it is also a scene that has several different definitions and commentaries for how people interpret the scene. You can see it for the fact that it's PTSD awareness. You can see it for the fact that people suffer through the holidays. There are many takeaways from this moment that even though it's just a short scene, it made a very huge impact. But also with that scene too, this is the reason why people see Lethal Weapon differently than the other buddy cop movies. In the entire history of our long-running editions of buddy cop movies that have come out, we've never had a movie that was able to do like what Lethal Weapon did, to talk about suicide and PTSD in a way that didn't feel like it wasn't being shoved under the rug, but still felt like it was catered to. This movie became one of the many definitions to be able to explain to people what mental health awareness looks like. With the way that Lethal Weapon was crafted by having the two scenes that were eventually put back into the movie, and then having the seriousness of the mental health scene with Martin Riggs, this movie was actually going to be longer. So isn't that the strangest movie math to hear? That you had two scenes go away, but yet there was talks about expanding on the history of Roger Murtaugh and Martin Riggs with their time in the Army. There's a lot of mention in this movie about their military career. I mean, shit, the movie is basically boosted off of the fact that Roger Murtaugh is connected to the victim within the case. That it was his Army buddy's daughter that died. And that really does have like a personal involvement, not supposed to happen, but, fiction, you do what you gotta do, plot's got a plot, it has to happen. There was also the mention with Martin Riggs about how he was one of the very few people that could do the 1,000-yard shot. So with the military careers being presented into the plot, that really would have stretched the movie more than it should have. Lethal Weapon has a perfect amount of time within the movie that you can be able to go through the case, the characters. Like, there's enough in this movie. And this was the director's cut of all things, with the two included scenes that weren't present when it was first released in 1987. So, we would have had a much darker movie presented. Like I said, if it wasn't for Jeffrey Boam, we would have had a very different movie if he didn't lighten the movie up a little bit. Shane Black is a very accomplished writer, but I'm very glad that he did not get his full creativity in this movie because it was already heavy enough. This movie has a perfect beginning, a middle, and an end where we feel like we've gotten to know enough about our characters that can lead way for the sequels to come. We have a little bit of information that we're given, and we can kind of use our imagination for a lot of it. There's a scene during the first climax of the movie where Roger Murtaugh and Martin Riggs are unfortunately caught by the bad guys, and then this kind of begins the clash of meeting the people that they were formerly in the military with, or people that they knew. Again, you kind of have to use your imagination about if they really did know these people or they knew of these people. Not having the background information for their military career really did show more in the climax, that it just kind of got like a nice little cliff note than having to feel we had to have the novel of their life. It worked a lot better than the original idea, and having that less is more really pulled through here. This movie hits differently after the passing of Richard Donner, who was the director of this movie, and I believe he also did the second movie, and I'm not quite sure about the others. Sometimes my movie trivia knowledge comes through and sometimes it doesn't. I didn't really notice this until I started writing this episode, was how much charm Richard Donner added to all of his films. Everything from Superman to Lethal Weapon to Scrooge to the other films that he did. There is so much charm to see with these characters that you enjoy to see them and you want to see more of them. Given the fact that he didn't write these characters and that he only directed the actors, but he did such a damn good job that it's immaculate to see how well he was able to make a movie that this really did feel real. He didn't pave the way for like other directors to do something different for the world of cinema. He just created an amazing film that has such a strong legacy. I really admire him for the way he was able to bring the most out of his actors. Even if that meant causing a little bit of drama to make some stuff happen for this movie to make it a stronger performance. Now, it's not uncommon knowledge that we do have directors that will find some certain tactics to find ways to elevate the performance of their actors. There was the very weird, encouraging badgering that Oliver Stone did to Michael Douglas to enhance his greed is good speech in the Wall Street movie. And then we have the very controversial shit that Stanley Kubrick did to Shelley Duvall to elevate her very scared performance in The Shining. And then we have the scene from Lethal Weapon where the fight scene happened over a waffle. Richard Donner started some beef between Mel Gibson and Gary Busey by saying that the other guy took the last waffle. That scene where they're both fighting, punching, kicking, getting in the mud, getting wet, and the whole time it's just like, you took the last waffle! Like, weird. I can't believe he did that. Well, I can actually believe he did that, but still. To have to use pastries to push a fight across. I mean, well then again, if that happened to me, oh god, I feel bad whoever's gonna fight me because they're not gonna survive. You're gonna have to register me as a lethal weapon. But that is kind of a funny thing to think about. During that whole fight scene that I've always admired as a child for how well that they were able to perform it. They worked with a lot of martial artists. They worked tirelessly to perfect this scene. And then Richard Donner was like, let me go ahead and fix this. Like, you guys are really great at fighting, but we really need some anger. So I'm just going to go ahead and tell these actors that the other guy took the last waffle. That is just nuts. The time frame for when Lethal Weapon came out is very impeccable with what happened in the production and the process. Because it actually has a lot of collaboration with Die Hard. Now, like, right off the bat, Lethal Weapon and Die Hard go hand in hand like peas and carrots. They're both the same thing. They're both Christmas action movies. Except you would have had two very different movies because of the certain actors that were in a negotiation with possibly being in the other latter film. Mel Gibson was offered Bruce Willis's part in the movie, and Bruce Willis was offered Mel Gibson's part in the movie. So you could have had something very different with how our leads were going to be in there. Honestly, I love Mel Gibson. I love Bruce Willis. I can see them in either movie, but they really did shine in their respected movie where they got to just own that character. However, we do have some people from Lethal Weapon that show up in Die Hard. It's a very interesting crossover. Mary Ellen Trainor, who plays the police psychologist in all four of the Lethal Weapon movies, pops up in Die Hard as the anchor Gail Wallens. And then there's another person from Lethal Weapon that pops up in a Die Hard, so keep an eye out on this guy when you rewatch these two Christmas action movies. In Lethal Weapon, there is a torturer that is doing this instrument onto Martin Riggs to electrocute him under the water faucet. And this guy pops up in Die Hard as one of the guys on Hans Gruber's terrorist team. It's kind of strange how much Lethal Weapon and Die Hard have in common with some of the familiar faces that have popped up in these movies together. So basically, Lethal Weapon and Die Hard are kind of like the distant cousins in the crime genre. Like, they have a relation even though they're not all the way related, but they got a pretty good connection. Pretty good relationship. For my closing points about this film, this is something that I made it my mission to get across because I hadn't really thought about this for quite some time. There's a strong legacy that Lethal Weapon has. It's done so much for the action genre, and it's a remarkable and amazing Christmas action movie. But the impact is actually stronger with how people bond over this movie. I was talking to a creator on TikTok, and she was telling me about how she and her mother bond over this movie every Christmas. And that took me back to when I watched this movie with my mom, and we watched it all the time back when we still lived together. It's one of those movies that, I guess in the cusp of it all, you wouldn't really peg it as one of those films that people bond over, but you never really know what is going to be the film that brings people together. And looking at Lethal Weapon, there is something for everybody. It is a Christmas action movie, but with all the moments in there, with the heartfelt moments and Christmas themes and your moments of drama and crime and thrills, it has something for everybody. It's a movie that's very balanced where you can have a fun time. You can be emotional at some points. You can just kind of take it easy with this film. It really is a film that does bring people together with what Lethal Weapon did. It created something new for the future of the buddy cop genre, but it also has a solid legacy for a lot of people that will forever remember this movie. It's again one of those films like Die Hard or like Long Kiss Goodnight that you don't have to watch on Christmas to celebrate it, but with the fact that it does open up with Jingle Bell Rock and ends with I'll Be Home for Christmas, it does put you in the Christmas feel. For a film that came out almost 40 years ago, it still has the same strong effect that it did back in 1987, and it gets carried on to the future generations that love this film so much and want to keep this film going. For a film that could be played off as just another crime movie, it had that strong charm and charisma and the ability to convey strong messages within this one movie. It's so much more than just an action movie, and that's why people keep coming back to it every year. Even though our main character says that he's getting too old for this shit, I don't think we're getting tired of it anytime soon. Okie dokie. So that is officially a wrap on the Lethal Weapon episode. I don't mind telling you guys, this was a difficult episode. I had a lot of fun with it, but I really wanted to make sure that this was an episode that had a lot of ground covered, and I wanted to make sure that I could correctly talk about the heaviest scene in this movie, and that was just a lot. So, for those out there that listen to this episode, you have no idea how much I appreciate you right now for taking the time to listen to this, because this was very hard. I had to redo this episode many times. Whew. But anyway, quick thing before we move on to finding out what our next episode is going to be. I was looking at my calendar math to see what it's going to be looking like for how I'm going to release the episodes and to know where they're going to land in this month. So the next episode will be coming out on the 18th. And then for a lucky treat to my surprise is that the last episode is going to fall on Christmas Eve. Man, that's going to be so cool. I'm looking forward to that. Whew, so it's going to be a little intense to see what our last two episodes are going to be. I'm going to laugh my ass off if we end up getting Die Harder. After all the times I've been talking about that movie for 2 episodes now in this Christmas series, I wonder if Karma's going to pay me a visit and we're going to end up having to get it because of the irony. Okie dokie, alright. So let's find out what our next episode's going to be. Okie dokie. Let me mix this up really good and see what we're going to get. Okay, I got one. Okie dokie. Okie dokie. Alrighty. I'm actually relieved with what the next episode is going to be. But I'm glad we have a tiebreaker from all of the Christmas action movies that we've been talking about so I can have some different variety. We have a classic movie. The next episode on the screen, Queen, is going to be A Christmas Story. Alright, that's going to be fun. I just watched that not too long ago, so I'm looking forward to talking about that movie, especially since that's a new addition to my my Christmas collection. While you wait for the next episode, you can catch up with me on Instagram. I have 2 accounts, actually. I have one called Paris Passages, where that's all about the stuff I do for my writing and my books. And then I have an official Instagram for this show called Queen of the Screen. And you can hit me up there. You can talk to me about movies, tell me your movie recommendations. And you can also find me on TikTok, where I post up behind-the-scenes footage of the very episodes you are listening to. You can find me at the Mystical Space Witch on TikTok. And with that said, your hostess is going to be signing off for this episode. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to this episode. Thank you to every single one out there that listens to this show. It makes me so very happy. The show has honestly been one of the shining points for me in my life in this very rough year that I've been going through, and it helps out so, so much. And I also want to say out there to those that are getting through the holiday season, if the holidays are not your thing because of your own personal reasons, my heart goes out to you, and I hope that everything goes well for you during the holiday season, that it just will be smooth and pleasant and everything, because your emotions matter, your feelings are valid, and you do what's best for you. Take care, stay safe, stay warm, and I will be back with another episode. This is your host, signing off. Bye-bye!